This is the Freeheel Life Podcast, episode number 173. I'm your host, Josh Madsen, coming at you from the Freeheel Life shop in Salt Lake City, Utah. And we're getting to the end of the old Telemark season, everybody. I've got this episode and then two more, and the last one will come out on April 3rd. So we're starting the wind down process of the season. And I am going to take a much needed sabbatical from doing the podcast this summer. Mostly so I can focus on some content endeavors and all sorts of good stuff over the spring and summer months. So I will miss you dearly, but I hope you'll be reinvigorated to get back on the proverbial Telemark horse in the fall, and we can continue the conversation from there. So just wanted to give you a heads up that we've only got a couple left. Maybe that'll give you, I know there's some diehards out there that listen every week, and I'm so grateful for you. But if you haven't listened to 173 episodes to this point, that should give you some catch-up time to listen to some of those. So some newsroom and notes today. We are having a massive sale on the website and in the shop. Basically just massive price cuts just to get everything out. We're just kind of trying to clear house. We are not going out of business. I had a customer reach out yesterday and was like, why is everything on sale? Or, something like to that effect, which I appreciate the sentiment of, or the caring sentiment that actually made me feel really good that someone cared enough. But basically what we're going to be doing is just kind of lightening up the load, things that we're 8 years into this thing. Sometimes like in the parts department, new parts, used parts, we just end up with a lot of stuff, and we're basically just trying to clear things out, get some capital back into the bank account for the summer, and make sure that we've got kind of a clear slate to bring things in the fall. So no worries there, but I hope you will take advantage of it. The one thing I was going to point out, I mentioned, are parts. We've got tons of new and used parts for your bindings, up to, I think, 50% off, maybe even 60% on some stuff. And it's a really good time to just stock up on that stuff. If you know you've got a part that you frequently break, we're one of the few retail outlets outside of manufacturers that carry all of the parts kind of broken down on a website that you can access. And it's a good place to kind of get in there. And we're doing as we're doing this, kind of cleaning up the website and tightening things up there, trying to get some more information on some of the listings. And it's just a great time for us to kind of clean house and for you to take advantage of it and get what you need. So be sure to check that out. Sales across the board. There's a couple pairs of skis left, couple pairs of boots left, couple bindings, and one or two things, I can think of, like some avalanche probes, some shovels. There's some stuff there that, there might be one or two left that we got to get out the door. And we're grateful if you make the purchase too. That helps us be successful as we head into the spring months, being a seasonal business. And as always, we always really appreciate it. So check out freeheellife.com and go get it. If you have any questions, hit up the team at customerservice@freeheellife.com, and we can be sure to get back to you. As far as the support desk goes, we are starting to wind down our communication there. So like I said, definitely hit us up now if you have specific questions about products that we carry and you need some help. Maybe you have a question about the parts that I was recommending you check out or whatnot. Happy to help there. We are going to be, for the most part, closing down the support desk for the spring and summer months as well. So it's a good opportunity to reach out now while we're still in-house this next week or so and make sure that we can try to answer your questions. Other than that, we're kind of taking a break. Last podcast coming out, we're going to be closing the shop, and we're going to close the support desk and just kind of get ready for a nice summer that we can sort of spend recuperating. But yeah, we're going to be finishing up our 8th season with the retail front and super excited about that. And we'll be in there doing some manufacturing over the summer with our Bluebird Day Gear products, and along with our Protector skis, which will be going into the 3rd season of production with that. And we'll make sure to bring you some more information regarding that. If you're interested in the Protector skis, want to get on our radar, customer service at freeheellife.com is the best way to do that. And we have a backlog of sort of a waiting list of people that are interested in that, and happy to answer questions and get you on to that program as we start building those again. As far as retail hours, today we are going to be open noon until 7. We're going to be closing Wednesday and Friday at 5 p.m. So we're going to be open 3 days this week, 12 to 7 today. Wednesday, 12 until 5 p.m. Friday, 12 until 5 p.m. And that's it. I'm going to be kind of sussing things out this week, but there's a chance that this is just going to probably be the last week of regular retail hours and kind of trim it down. And then we'll probably, in the last week of March, probably go to an appointment only and, online service tickets, that sort of thing. And I know there's a ton of snow. We're most likely going to hit 700 inches here in Utah this week. So it's been a big year, and there is going to be skiing probably until July 4th. Usually Snowbird manages to pull that off, but there's going to be some fantastic spring skiing, and it's just going to be a good time. So really excited about that. And I know there's a lot of snow elsewhere. I was just up in Duluth, Minnesota this past week. Got to ski Spirit Mountain for the first time, which has been on my list, and I had a fantastic day skiing with my buddy Keith Opperman. And there's still a lot of snow there. We had fantastic conditions, and what a cool mountain. I love those mom and pop resorts, and got to do a nice little stop at Continental, which is a shop there in Duluth. And Telemark is alive and well in that zone. So shout out to, of course, Keith Opperman running the Midwest Telefest up in the Upper Peninsula, and Lake Superior Telemark Authority and that crew in the Duluth area. Always appreciate going to those zones and just knowing that there's a nice crew of folks that are crushing it there, sharing the stoke and getting out and making some turns. So I think as far as the newsroom and notes, that's kind of the main stuff. So just keep tabs on our email list. You can sign up for that in the show notes. Very important way to communicate with us. We're really, this season, we really made a hard push to kind of move even more to heavy communication through the email list, mostly because social media is so hit and miss, whether you're going to see it or scroll past it, or you're not even on social media. Generally speaking, most people have email, and we're trying to kind of simplify, because we're such a small crew, trying to simplify how our communication channels can work. And that's a great way to do it. So especially as these hours are kind of fluid and changing the next week or so, be sure to stay on the email list, because that's a really good way just to keep a heads up on our movements as we head into closing the retail front for the season. And we appreciate all the support. It's been a fantastic year, and we couldn't be happier finishing up that eighth season. I think that's kind of it. I will mention, I just mentioned that trip to Duluth, and I've been doing some retail visits. I mentioned that on the podcast that I've gone through Colorado in person a couple times, and we're starting to reopen some retail shops in various areas that are going to be carrying the Bluebird product and also some of our Freeheel Life product. So if you're out there, I always like to, I've got a pretty good sense, having been on the road for so many years and traveling across the country, I've got a pretty good idea of which shops traditionally carried Telemark gear. But, as we're opening up new retail shops, I'm really going to be looking at very specific shops that we trust, that can handle our product and that we can educate on our product, so that one, we can make it more convenient for you, podcast listener and customer, to go to that local shop. So what I need from you is, I would love to hear what your local shop is that you would like to see carry Telemark, and maybe just tell me like, hey, is this somebody who carried it in the past? Or is this someplace that you think might be a good option for us? Because what we don't want to do is open a bunch of doors in one area. We really want to bring quality education and make sure we're at the right place. For our we've got 3 SKUs, or 3 products, I guess, for Bluebird Day Gear, and then obviously Freeheel Life stuff as well. So I would love to get your feedback, and it can be anywhere in the world, but specifically in the United States or Canada. I'm really interested in those, and you guys are the boots on the ground out there. You're the people that are buying stuff from those shops, and that's a great way for us to get a personal feeling of what's going on in your area. And some of these places I haven't maybe been to in a number of years, so I trust you. I trust you to tell me where you would like to go. And again, the cool part about this is, we can't have Freeheel Life like retail stores with our product in every city, but what we can do is bring that to your local shop. And if it's the right fit for us and our product, and they're down for our mission, then we definitely want to talk to them. And hopefully that'll make it easier for you to access the stuff that you need as we move into the future. So be sure to hit me up at podcast@freeheellife.com. And let me know what would be that retailer if you had your druthers. Like, what is your retailer in your area, and who should we talk to? I'll mention a couple places that you can pick up Bluebird Day Gear product that we did some late orders sending out this year, and just kind of want to shed some light on them because they've got it. First one, Denver on the Wasatch Front, Confluence Kayak. You can go and pick up Bluebird Day Gear product there. And so for all you Front Range folks, that's a good spot. Make sure to tell them we sent you and you heard it on the podcast, and you wanted to go support them and pick up what they've got left and help them out as they start rolling into their other sports seasons in the spring. Also, Clearwater Sports in Waitsfield. That's right by Mad River Glen and Sugarbush. That's another good spot you could go and support. And Base Camp at the bottom of Killington in Vermont as well. Those are the 3 right off the top of my head, and just want to give them a shout out. And go in there and let them know that you heard the podcast and you wanted to support them. Pick up a pair of leashes or some heel levers, and let them know that you're local and you're a podcast listener, you're a customer of ours, and you want to be able to support them. And it's important that they carry that product to make it easier for you. So there's my pitch to you. But this is how we grow it, and super excited to start getting into that realm. That's kind of been my dream from the beginning of taking over Bluebird Day Gear from Jeff Cox, and also as a mechanism to help us not only break the ice with some of these retailers with products like leashes and levers and the smile plates for the old 3-pin boots, but also be able to get our Freeheel Life stuff there. So hopefully that'll help you sort of see the vision as we start heading into next year. And I would love to hear your feedback. So again, podcast@freeheellife.com. Hit me up and let me know what's up in your area. Last bit of news is we kind of head out of this section of the podcast, is I wanted to mention next week I've got a fantastic guest. I don't know much about him, but his name is Jacob Schiller, and he wrote a piece for Ski Magazine called "Everyone Should Own a Telemark Ski Setup." And I know many of you have read it because people sent it in to me to read, and I thought it was a really good piece that he wrote. And I tracked him down, and we're going to have a little chat about it. So super excited to have Jacob Schiller on the podcast next week. You can tune in next Monday, and we're going to have a nice chat, not only about that piece and sort of his thoughts on that, what it all means, but kind of get his background too. It's always fun. I always like getting those pieces that are being written out there, or other, content that I feel like is good for kind of the general conversation of Telemark, and getting those folks in on and kind of sharing some ideas on that. So be sure to tune in next week for Jacob Schiller, and we're going to be talking about why everyone should own a Telemark ski setup. And I think I know I'll enjoy the conversation, and hope you will as well. So today we're going to play a little cleanup. Mailbag episode number 13. And I feel like since I've only got 3 episodes, this was the time to do it. Dig into the mailbox, dig into some comments, if we get to it, from some social media stuff, and answer your questions that you're sending in and comments. And I always enjoy these because I get a real feel for what's going on in the Telemark world. And so yeah, this is a good cleanup as we kind of head into these last episodes. So I wanted to kick off. This was a message that I got in the email the other day. It says, "Hey Josh, I know you've mentioned moving the podcast to a video format. I'm sure there are plenty of folks that are excited about that prospect. I just want to give you the feedback that the convenience of the audio podcast is what makes it great. I can listen while I'm driving, doing dishes, working in the yard, etc. If it goes to video, I'm out, and that will be a bummer. I would imagine there are a few others that may be in the same situation. Just something to consider. It's incredible that you've put 172 of them out already. Your upcoming break is well-deserved. Nice work, Alex." So first off, Alex, thank you so much. I appreciate you listening out there. And I thought about this. It hadn't even crossed my mind because, video. It's funny. I've put all of the podcast episodes on YouTube since day one, but obviously there's no video component, and it was more from a body of work catalog standpoint that I put them there. And some people do listen to the audio on Facebook, even with no video. And that's totally cool. But I wanted to reassure anyone out there that, as I can get to the video format, which I'm excited about, it does add quite a bit of workload, and I'm trying to kind of work through the kinks of that. But there will always be an audio component to it. So it'll still be available on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, all of the different audio podcast platforms. Where the video really shows up is Spotify. Generally has a video component, and then obviously YouTube, and it gives some more potential to build some clips out of the video that may be a little easier to digest instead of getting into an hour-long podcast. But Alex and anybody else out there that are audio listeners, 100%, it's going to continue just as is. It will only be video format on the platforms that do have that availability, and be a good reference to, I know there's podcasts I listen to. I generally am an audio listener as well, a lot of drive time and whatnot. But sometimes they'll reference visuals, which that would, especially talking gear or whatever, you may want to go back and see something if that's available. So just wanted to allay everybody's fears that the podcast, if and when, I should say when we get some video going, the audio will continue to be a part of that. So thanks for the call out on that. Okay, rolling into the next question here. This one says, "Hi, Josh and FHL team. Was just listening to episode 166 and the discussion about Polonia and other lightweight woods being insufficient for tele-related forces. I found a pretty good deal on some line skis, Sakanas, but noticed that they have a maple Polonia core. Is this a showstopper? Super fired up about the purpose and design of the ski, but don't want a catastrophic failure at speed. Would be mounting them with 22D Outlaws and Crispy Evo World Cup boots. Any thoughts or recommendations would be appreciated. Thanks, Rory." So I wanted to read this one only because episode 166 was kind of interesting. The some of the feedback I got was interesting and not totally what I expected, but I thought I would clarify a little bit about why I did that episode. And then hopefully that kind of answers, we can specifically sort of answer Rory's question. But episode 166 was specifically about lightweight equipment for telemark skiing. And really a lot of it was about skis and kind of calling out some of these woods that are being used in lightweight skis like Polonia and Karuba. And the biggest thing I was trying to accomplish in that episode was that a lot of people were not aware that many of these skis are not warranted any longer if you mount a Telemark binding on them. That's per the manufacturer. So that was sort of mission objective number one, is make sure you as a customer, if you're buying some ski out there, is make sure you understand that if you mount tele bindings on there, which most of my listeners would, that you may lose your money. That was really like the main purpose, is making sure you understand that. I think it got a little misconstrued. I'll see if I get to one of these emails later on. As if, one, I was saying that we shouldn't be in search of lightweight skis and, we should just settle for what there is. It was more from the financial perspective of a consumer that I was calling that out. So I guess to answer Rory's question specifically, I don't know anything about the Sakanas. How the maple and Polonia core is put together, that's what you want to research. I've seen some prototypes that a company that we are familiar with starting to do like a maple insert below where the bindings would mount, and they are using, to my knowledge, Polonia with that in other parts of the core. As far as I can tell, that would probably solve the binding retention issue better via the hardwood underfoot, and maybe keep it lightweight with the Polonia throughout the rest of the ski. So you may want to look into that. I have seen some Telemark skiers on those Sakanas, and I haven't heard of any issues, but it's something to keep in mind. Just from a spending standpoint, that's my biggest thing when you're looking at what's out there. You just want to find a ski that's going to work correctly for what you're doing. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. Do your research about try to find out where the maple is and where the Polonia is. And, I may get to some of these additional emails that were follow-ups to that episode 166. But what I will say is hardwood is less likely, just from a very simplistic, like super non-engineering viewpoint. Hardwood's going to hold the screw better than soft Polonia would. That's it. So just be aware of that. And I hopefully that kind of answers your question about maybe how to approach that ski and any other ski that may be using similar materials. So thanks for the question. Okay. Next one. This has been an interesting continual topic that's popping up, so I thought this would be a good one to read. It says, "Yo, Josh and Freeheel Life, I'm writing to make a plea. You guys have to intervene over at Blister. Blister is like a a review. They review a bunch of ski gear. Blister Gear Review. I don't know the full name, but Blister, I mean, I think it's kind of common knowledge at this point. So Blister keeps bringing on Jeff McFetridge on their podcast. And he says, apparently Jeff's a Telemark skier. He seems like a cool dude, but he may not know a lot about the gear, the technique, history of the turn. Blister is growing and becoming a major source of information for alpine skiers, and that community is getting a weird perspective on Telly. You dudes are carrying the Telly torch, and I'd love it if Josh or someone there could be or could get Blister and drop some knowledge. Fingers crossed. And that's from Aubrey in Boise, Idaho. So I'm sure, and funny enough, someone actually suggested this Jeff guy to be on the podcast too. I believe he's an artist. Someone mentioned that he did some graphics for a K2 at one point, I think, if I can remember right. If Jeff's listening, I'm sure you're a great dude. If you want to be on the podcast, let me know. Always happy to have interesting people on. So, and I haven't listened to any of this. The reason I read this one is because Blister Review seems to keep popping up. I think there was a video a couple years ago where kind of that whole Blister crew went out and tried Telemark for the first time. Obviously, a lot of them aren't Telemark skiers. I don't really follow it, to be honest. Just doesn't really serve a purpose for me in terms of anything I'm looking to consume sort of like as a listener or watcher myself. I'd love it if they want to review our skis though. That's awesome. So if anybody's listening from Blister, hit me up. We'll send you some protectors, and you guys can put alpine bindings or Telly bindings on them and rip them. They're great skis. But a lot of people have kind of written in and kind of brought this Blister stuff to my attention. Hey, I'm always down to be a guest anywhere I can talk about Telemark and share my message about Freeheel life, what we do as a business, our expertise, and sort of our mission objective for what we do in Telemark. I love that. So, anybody out there that maybe you're a Freeheel Life podcast listener, and you also enjoy listening to Blister, send him a message. Tell him I'm game and request me as a guest on their podcast. I would love to do that. And that goes for any podcast or outlet, large or small. I'm always down. I love doing TV, radio, podcasts, interviews for pieces. I mentioned I helped interview for a junior high school project. Whatever it is, I'm in. I'd love to be that go-to guy when it comes to everything from Telemark history, perspective on the modern day market, equipment, what works, what doesn't work. And so I would encourage all of you, including Aubrey, to reach out to Blister and make a request. If you want to take the time. I'd love to be a guest on there, and I don't know anybody there, so happy to do so. But yeah, anyways, I thought that'd be a good kind of segue into that. Anything, like I did a gear talk a week or two ago for the Freeheel Frolic event via Zoom over in Mad River Glen. I love doing that kind of thing where, I can tune in, talk to folks, let them know, what I'm up to, what our team's up to at Freeheel Life, and always a great experience. So thanks for the heads up, and thanks for the question. So jumping over to a gear question that came in, says, hey, Josh and Taylor, he had CC'd old Telly Tay on here as well. I'm skiing with a buddy up at Schweitzer who skis Crispy Evo World Cup size 14 because they're the only boot that fits him. He's had them for 3 or 4 years, and this year, for the first time, he's getting horrible toe pinch, which is causing ulcers to form on his toes. I'm a faithful podcast listener with a bad memory, hence my email to you and Taylor for help. I recall, maybe incorrectly, that there was a podcast in which the discussion came around toe pinch. My recollection was that there was mention of plastic fatigue and that it shows up or can become apparent after a period of time. Am I making this up? If not, can you point me to the particular podcast or any other resource that I can pass along? Thanks so much, Kevin, out of Seattle. Well, Kevin, first off, I'm not an expert on the crispy boots, but I will say the interesting thing that sticks out to me and is an interesting tidbit of fact is the highest number in, okay, so I brought this up. It's kind of a funny, strange thing in Telemark NTN boots specifically. The sizing ends at Mondo 30. So like size 12-ish. I guess if you're really doing the rough math. Okay. So obviously the size 14. What that reminds me of is I know that in NTN boots, this is my knowledge. Again, I'm not an expert on crispy. You got to go to the crispy distributor to figure that one out. But my understanding when we did carry those boots is the size 30 and 30.5, which is where the size break would be. So 30.5 and 31 would technically be 30.5 and 31 would be its own shell size. Now, from when we did carry the Evo boots many years ago, I remember us figuring out that the 30 and the 30.5 and the 31 was actually all one shell size, which is inconsistent with Telemark boot sizing across the board. But how they were navigating that is not only were they saying that there was a shell 31, which included the half size, the 30.5, but they were going thinner and thinner of a liner getting up into that upper size. So my sneaking suspicion is that it's got a paper thin liner. I've never personally been a fan of that liner in the crispy boots in comparison to the Scarpa liner, which I think is superior, better quality. And a lot of times, friends of mine that do ski that boot tend to just chuck the liner in the garbage and buy an Intuition liner, aftermarket and go that route. So that's kind of my sneaking suspicion is he's got a really big foot and he's got a paper thin liner, and that liner probably is super packed out because there wasn't much to begin with, and that's probably causing some of that. Now, I don't recall which episode we talked about toe pinch specifically. I would have to probably go back into the catalog and try to figure that out. But toe pinch doesn't, if I'm understanding what you're describing, you're probably describing a toe pinch from the bellows. And, that can happen to people depending on the boot. It's not as common of a problem as it was like in the early plastic boot era or certain iterations along the way over the past 30 years. But it's possible, The only other thing I could think that might be of a benefit, again, if he can fit in a Scarpa boot, you are getting a little bit wider last, meaning the width, which may give him some more space. So if I had to give advice of like a starting point, he obviously is in those boots and he's in an NTN boot. So that's good. So based on the knowledge that I'm sharing with you, at least, unless I'm missing something, and there in fact is a 31 NTN boot that I am unaware of, someone feel free to correct me, like a legit 31 shell. I don't think that's the case, which would mean that it's a 30 shell in crispy, which is also a 30 shell in Scarpa. So the best thing to do is go get yourself sized, or have your friend size up on a foot device like a Brannick size up, and then do a shell fit and make sure that you've got a good, at least, 1.5 finger fit in the shell fit. A boot fitter can help you with that if that makes no sense. And then from there, you might have to figure out the liner situation. Little sidebar to that whole thing. Why I've always called out this problem of not having Mondo 30 and Mondo 31 in NTN is it's an actual real issue that's going to come more to light as we head into the coming years. And let me explain why. NTN is broken down into small NTN, which is Scarpa and Crispy 26.0 Mondo and below, and 26.5 Scarpa and Crispy up is large NTN. So I'm referring to the binding, which is also the measurement of the toe to the second heel. Okay, so it's how it goes into the binding. That's why you could have in large NTN someone who wears size 27 Mondo and a person who wears size 30 Mondo can all fit in one large NTN binding without any adjustment. Very different from a cable binding, okay? Now, that 31 and 32 shell that does not exist, to my knowledge, is going to be an issue because here's this gentleman, your buddy. It's a real issue when let's say he is a true size 14. He's probably, if you actually measure it true 14, you're probably closer to a Mondo 32. Okay, so here's the issue now. What boot can you get in NTN that's Mondo 32? There is none. They would have to create a what I would call an NTN XL in order to, and that would mean the bindings also would have to create an XL measurement for the binding. So you'd actually have 3 NTN bindings, small, large, and XL. That doesn't exist. And the other problem is now that Scarpa eliminated the T1 and Crispy's eliminated most of their 75 lineup as well, but I'm very much more familiar with the Scarpa products. One of the things when they eliminated the T1, which was the 4-buckle boot, that went up to Mondo 31. Okay, so it did have that next shell size up. That would cover 30.5 Mondo and 31 all in the same boot. And to clarify, all it is in those, there are no true half sizes. The liner in the lower half, like the 30.1 in this, or I'm sorry, 30.5 in this example, it's a 3 millimeter difference in the liner. Okay. So essentially that 31 in the T1 was really great because it made it so that a larger foot could fit in a 4-buckle boot. Well, T1 goes away. And now if you have a large foot, the only boot that goes Mondo 32 is the Scarpa T2 Eco. Okay. So the dilemma that I'm seeing in the future of boots, specifically in this conversation, is someone with a large foot highly likely is a larger person as well. Might be larger in stature, might be larger in weight, might be both. And the only option that they have is the softest boot minus the T4. They're going to have to go into a T2 Eco. One, they're not in NTN. That's an issue if you're trying to direct people in that direction of binding compatibility. And also you're putting a heavier, larger person with a bigger foot in a softer boot. So that's kind of the sidebar to this whole thing. And, I think one, really size up. And I'm saying this not to discredit that he knows his foot size, but there's so many variations on foot length. A lot of times someone thinks they're I've had this happen multiple times in the retail space. people come in, they say I'm a size 14, and we're actually able to get them into a Mondo 30. And it's just because, whatever shoe they're wearing measures that street shoe measures at 14, and somehow they're a 12 in a ski boot. So get a good shell fit in that crispy Evo that he's got. And if for some miraculous reason he is close to that, good shell fit on the size 30, he may consider going to a Scarpa boot with a little bit better liner and a really good mold, get that extra last in the toe box, and then kind of work from there. But there really is no other solution in terms of a 31, 32 Mondo in that NTM platform. And like I said, I'm calling it now. That's going to be a major issue because I don't think we've heard about it a lot yet, because T1 just barely went away. And so you've got used boots on the market, and people that are, as we start transitioning more and more to the NTM platform for the bindings, you can't just not make boots for those folks. I'm not saying it's the most common size, but I do think historically speaking, in all of the lineups that Scarpa's made over the years, there's been that Mondo 31 and 32. And in my opinion, we need to continue that consistency in order to maintain people doing what they love to do. And so that I'll kind of leave it there, but hopefully that helps. I hope your buddy can get some information. Definitely reach out to us, customer service at freeheellife.com, and we can walk your buddy even through a shell fit virtually, and we could kind of at least suss it out there. So definitely want to be available for that, and try to help you out the best we can. Okay, we're going to end on the last one being another gear question. It says, "Hi Josh, your podcast is awesome. I listen to it every week, and I'm going to miss the podcast over the summer. So it will be all the better when you start up again next fall. I hope you have a fun summer. I'm in British Columbia, Canada, and have been telemarking since the winter of 2020. Unfortunately, I don't have the money for new gear, so I have been upgrading my used 75mm gear slowly as I can find gear available locally for a good price. I started with borrowed G3 Targas and Voodoos. Then I got given a couple sets of skis, one with Targas and one with Chili's on CRBs. I experienced a couple pre-releases with the CRBs, so I tended to ski the Targas more. Later, I found out that the pre-release was due to my plastic boots. He has BD Customs and crispy CXRs. And then I wanted a wider ski and bought another setup mounted with Targas. Anyway, last year I wanted to get into the backcountry skiing and took an avalanche course. So this year I bought a pair of 7TM Power Tours as I wanted a free pivot binding for touring. What are your thoughts on 7TM and G3 Enzo free pivot bindings? These are two bindings I don't hear you talk about too much and are quite readily available up here. The used gear pages are flooded with Targas and the odd Targa Ascent, but I wanted a more active binding, and axles and volet bindings are not readily available used up here. Would the 7TM have less sideways slop? I can't remember the term. Then a cable binding because there is no cable. Also, it's nice that the 7TMs are still produced so parts can be found. Finally, I read on one of the big European Telemark retailers' websites that 7TM is working on an NTN binding. Have you heard anything about that? Thanks for your time. Cheers. Brent from Bridge Lake, BC. And his local hill is Mount Timothy and Sun Peaks. Actually just heard about Sun Peaks yesterday from another customer in the U.S. He said he's heading up there. It sounds like a good spot. Well, Brent, thanks for the email. I will also miss all of you over the summer, and thanks for listening to the podcast, and psyched to have you on board the Telemark family since 2020. That's pretty awesome. Lots of good little tidbits in this email that Brent sent in. First, I applaud you for finding used gear and just getting going. I love that. I always love hearing what's available in the area, so that's kind of a really cool thing. And the Targas, obviously, if you can find that stuff and keep them moving, it's a good binding. And the CRB is kind of an interesting one. That pre-release has always been an issue with that binding, so I understand kind of where you're headed. Specifically about your question about 7TM and G3 Enzo, here's why I don't talk about them too much. 7TM in the United States has kind of had a crazy sort of history. For a short time in the early 2000s, 7TM was carried, it was distributed by Track Sports USA that owned Karhu skis. And that was kind of the time, during that time I was actually skiing for Karhu. And that was honestly the closest proximity I've had to that binding since then. And like that whole time, it always was kind of an interesting outlier in my opinion. I do believe that 7TM Tour was the first free pivot binding and definitely set things in motion for other people to follow with the Black Diamond 01, the axle, and the switchback from Volet. So from a historic standpoint, definitely played a role in there. My personal feel of the 7TM, I never liked the binding because it was such a neutral feel. And you mentioned it, although it doesn't have a cable, it's got kind of a funky almost piece that it's an underfoot cable routing, and there's a spring mechanism in the heel that provides the spring tension. But overall, it's an incredibly neutral binding, and you still don't really get the lateral of like a hard wire. Like on a switchback would have like hard wires instead of like a traditional cable, like a Targa. Even with that underfoot cable routing, there's a lot of twist and a lot of neutral feeling. So I've never been a big fan of it. It sounds like parts might be available to you. I don't know if you're ordering from Europe. They're definitely difficult to find in the United States, as far as I've been able to tell over all those years. I bought a 7TM jig in 2014 when I opened the shop because, funny enough, I mean, the only reason I bought that jig is I had a local ski patroller buddy of mine, and they had some old rule on the books that was the only releasable binding that he could use as a ski patroller. And so I had to track down a jig somewhere, and we still have it to this day. So every once in a while, once or twice a year, we'll get a pair coming through and we'll do a mount and whatnot. And it's got a pretty good release system. It's kind of similar concept to the CRB, the complete release binding from Volet that's no longer manufactured, but kind of the concepting of it is good. I do believe that might have been one of the only DIN certified, if I remember right, bindings out there. As far as performance though, not a fan. I don't think you're going to get much more performance out of it than you would a Targa. It's got a pretty similar pivot point, and just not one of my favorite bindings to ever be made personally. G3 Enzo is kind of a funky one. Honestly, I totally even forgot that came out. Enzo was kind of G3's last binding they ever put out, and there was the G3 Enzo and the Enzo R, which I believe the R was for Randonnée. It was their free pivot, which I think is the one you're referencing here. And it was kind of their response to the axle. 22 Designs had put the axle out. The Enzo is similar underfoot cable routing. I believe the pivot point, they had kind of riffed off of the slick pin concept of the 22 Designs axle, which came from the Hammerhead changing pivot point that you could do with what they call a slick pin, which is a little bar that goes through and catches the cables at different points and creates either a more neutral or a more active feel. It didn't last very long. it had a lot of plastic parts on it that I don't think were super durable, and G3 doesn't make those parts anymore, so you're going to have a hard time with that. It sounds like you're on the right track. If you're trying to upgrade it, this wasn't really your question, but I'll just kind of continue. I think the thought process that you're on, the availability of used equipment in Canada in certain areas is difficult. So finding an axle to get the free pivot tour mode and get the durability and availability of parts, etc., I think you're on the right track. And honestly, if you've already got boots that work, you got good 75 millimeter boots, sounds like you got a pair of skis, I would recommend putting the money into the axle. Even if you have to buy them new, if you're going to stay in the 75 millimeter category, want the tourability, axle is the way to go, in my opinion. I truly think that's sort of the pinnacle of 75 millimeter. The switchback also would be that's also a great binding. It's more lightweight and simplistic. I would probably bump up the axle over the switchback just because you've got a 6-hole mounting pattern, which I just like having those extra screws in the ski, personal opinion. But sounds like you're on the right track. Hopefully that answered your question about 7TM and Enzo. I'm not, and I guess you did mention the NTN binding. I have heard nothing about that. Wouldn't surprise me. Again, I've always kind of looked at 7TM as sort of an outlier. I never hear too much about it, probably because it tends to be more in the European market. And sometimes things will pop up there that I just don't know about, don't hear about. But that'd be cool. I'd love to see more people get into the NTN platform. Obviously, my philosophies on that is at some point that's just going to be a Telemark binding. That's how we fasten to the ski. There's lots of gaps. I won't go into that because that's not this podcast. But yeah, I would love to hear that. If anybody's seen or heard anything on the 7TM stuff, always interested to hear more about that. But thanks for the email, Brent. Really appreciate it. So that's going to wrap up Mailbag episode number 13, everybody. Love being here. I'm already starting to get kind of sad too. I can't believe I've only got 2 episodes. It's going to be kind of strange not recording every week and putting these out, but I'm really excited for having some time off and being able to focus on stuff, read some material that I've got sitting around that I haven't had time to get to, learn more about Telemark history, plan out the podcast for next year, figure out the video thing, and the like. But if you want to keep up, like I said, sign up for the mailing list. That's such a great way to stay in touch with us. We don't share it with anybody. That's our connection to you out there, from Freeheel Life to you, to give you information about what we're doing in our business, what kind of content we're putting out, and such a great way to keep in touch. Don't forget to go to freeheellife.com. This week, we've got a huge site-wide sale, huge cuts on stuff. We talked a lot about parts, used gear, and plenty of new stuff left. So help us get it out the door. We appreciate your support. Like always, we could not be here without you. And we love being a part of the Telemark community in the various ways that we can. If you want to connect with me, hit me up at podcast@freeheellife.com. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Josh Nomadson. And you can find all the Freeheel Life stuff at Freeheel Life. Check out our YouTube channel, subscribe there. And if you're listening to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, take a second to rate and review the podcast. That really helps us get in front of more people, more listeners. And I always love reading those. And it's a great way for us to keep tabs on what's going on specifically with the podcast. So I really appreciate you all. I'll be back next week talking to Jacob Schiller about why everyone should own a Telemark ski setup. And until next week, spread Telemark always.